At 6:47 a.m. on November 18, 1943, Corporal Eugene Decker crouched behind a palm-scarred ridge on Bougainville Island, watching steam rise from 6 cooking pots while Japanese mortar rounds landed 400 yards to his front. He was 24 years old, from Omaha in Nebraska, and he was doing something that could get him court-martialed before breakfast. The smell of frying bacon mixed with cordite and jungle rot. Behind him, 3 privates worked the field stoves, hands shaking every time a mortar thundered. Ahead, just beyond the ridgeline, 48 Marines were preparing for a dawn assault on Japanese positions. They had no idea Decker was there. The Marine Corps had rules about field kitchens. Clear rules. They stayed 5 miles behind the front lines. They served hot meals at secure base camps. They did not, under any circumstances, set up shop within enemy artillery range. Decker had broken every single one. He checked his watch. 13 minutes until the Marines moved into position. 15 until they'd smell the coffee. He'd either be feeding them the first hot breakfast they'd had in 6 weeks, or he'd be explaining to a firing squad why he'd risked 4 lives and $3,000 worth of equipment to fry eggs within spitting distance of Japanese machine guns. A mortar round hit the ridge above them. Dirt rained down into the scrambled eggs. Private Jackson looked at Decker with wide eyes. "Corporal, maybe we should keep cooking," Decker said. He didn't tell Jackson why this mattered. He didn't explain about Private Morrison or Corporal Riley or the 17 other men he'd watched stumble into dawn assaults with nothing but cold beans and terror in their stomachs. He didn't talk about the pattern he'd noticed, the one that kept him awake at night. Cold breakfast, failed assault, body bags, hot meal, successful attack, men coming home. The Marines cresting the ridge were above, to prove whether a mess sergeant from Nebraska had figured out something the entire United States military had missed, or whether Decker had just committed the most expensive breakfast mistake in Marine Corps history. The bacon was perfect. Eugene Decker grew up in his family's restaurant on Farnham Street in Omaha. His father ran the kitchen. His mother ran the books. By age 12, Gene could crack 200 eggs in an hour without getting shell in a single one. By 16, he was working the morning shift, feeding factory workers and cab drivers and cops before dawn. He knew what a good breakfast did to a man. He'd watched it 10,000 times. Guy would shuffle in, shoulders hunched, face gray. Hot coffee, eggs over easy, crispy bacon, buttered toast. 20 minutes later, he'd walk out different, straighter, ready for the day, ready for whatever the world was going to throw at him. Decker enlisted 3 days after Pearl Harbor. He was 22. The Army wanted cooks, and he could cook. They made him a private, put him through basic training, then shipped him to a supply battalion. 6 months later, he was in the South Pacific, feeding soldiers on Guadalcanal. Then they transferred him to a Marine division. That's when he started noticing the pattern. The Marines ate breakfast at 500 hours. Standard Army rations, served cold from the can. Beans, hash, sometimes fruit cocktail that tasted like tin. They'd eat in silence, faces blank, then gear up for morning patrols or assaults or whatever hell the officers had planned. Decker watched them go out. He watched them come back. The ones who came back. He'd been on Bougainville for 6 weeks. 42 days of watching Marines eat cold food and walk into Japanese machine gun fire. The kitchen was set up 5 miles back at the main base. Division regulations. Mess sergeants prepared hot evening meals there, but breakfast and lunch were cold rations delivered to the front in crates. Nobody questioned it. That's how field operations worked. Hot food stayed in the rear. Combat troops ate cold. Except Decker kept seeing the difference. Evening assaults, after hot dinner, had an 85% success rate. Dawn assaults, after cold breakfast, barely hit 50%. He wasn't a tactician. He was a cook, but he could read a pattern. The problem was, nobody cared what a corporal from Nebraska thought about combat effectiveness. Private Danny Morrison was 19 years old, from a farm outside Minneapolis. He'd been on Bougainville for 3 weeks. Tall kid, blonde hair, always smiling. He'd come through Decker's chow line every evening, say, "Thank you, sir," even though Decker was enlisted, and you didn't call enlisted, sir. On November 3rd, Morrison's platoon got assigned a dawn patrol, 0600 departure, cold rations for breakfast. Decker watched them eat, watched Morrison try to force down the beans, watched him give up halfway through. "Can't stomach it this early, Corporal," Morrison said. "I'll eat when we get back." They walked into a Japanese ambush at 0640. Morrison took a machine gun burst through the chest. He was dead before the medic reached him. Lieutenant Hayes stood in Decker's kitchen that night, still wearing Morrison's blood on his uniform. "They were sluggish," Hayes said. "The whole goddamn patrol. Moving slow, reactions off. We walked right into it." "They have breakfast?" Decker asked. Hayes looked at him like he was insane. "Cold rations, same as always. What the hell does that have to do with anything?" Decker didn't answer, but he started paying closer attention. 2 weeks later, Corporal James Riley led a squad on a morning reconnaissance. Riley was 22, from Boston, tough as nails. Combat veteran, 6 months in the Pacific. The kind of Marine who didn't make mistakes. Cold breakfast. 0530 departure. Japanese sniper got him at 6:15. Single shot through the throat. Riley's sergeant reported the same thing. He was moving different, slower. Didn't check the tree line the way he usually does. It was like he was still half asleep. Decker started asking questions. Quietly. He talked to sergeants, to squad leaders, to anyone who'd listen. He pulled combat reports from the S2 office. He compared morning operations to evening operations. The pattern was undeniable. Cold breakfast. 47% mission success rate, 12% casualty rate. Hot dinner followed by evening operations. 82% success rate, 4% casualty rate. He took his findings to Captain Miller, the company commander. Miller looked at the papers for 30 seconds. "Corporal, correlation isn't causation. Morning operations are more dangerous because the Japanese defend differently at dawn. It has nothing to do with what the men ate for breakfast." "Sir, respectfully." "Dismissed, Corporal." Decker went back to his kitchen. 5 miles behind the lines, where it was safe, where regulations said mess operations belonged. He served hot dinner that night to 300 Marines. He watched their faces change as they ate, watched exhaustion fade, watched strength return. And he started doing math in his head. 400 yards. That's how close the forward positions were to a particular ridge that had cover, concealment, and access to water. 400 yards from Japanese lines. Close enough for mortar fire. Close enough to hear the machine guns. Close enough to get hot food to Marines before dawn. He knew what would happen if he tried it. Court-martial, discharge, maybe military prison. The Army didn't look kindly on corporals who ignored direct orders about field kitchen placement. But he kept thinking about Morrison. About Riley. About the 17 other body bags he'd watched loaded onto trucks. About the pattern. The United States military in 1943 had very specific regulations about field kitchens. They were outlined in Army Regulation 30405 and Marine Corps Order 4063. Kitchens operated at secure base facilities, minimum 5 miles behind active combat zones. Hot meals were served twice daily at these locations. Forward troops received cold rations delivered in insulated containers. The reasoning was sound. Field kitchens required water, fuel, supplies, and personnel. They generated smoke, noise, and light. They were vulnerable to artillery, air attack, and infiltration. Putting them near the front lines risked equipment, subah, lies, and trained cooks. The regulations had been written by logistics officers at the War Department in Washington, D.C. Men who'd studied military history, analyzed supply chains, calculated risk factors. Men who'd never watched a 19-year-old try to force down cold beans at 500 hours before walking into machine gun fire. The regulations made perfect sense on paper. They were killing Marines in practice. Decker tried explaining this to anyone who'd listen. He showed his combat reports to the Battalion S4, the logistics officer. He got a lecture about statistical analysis and sample size. He showed them to the Battalion XO, the second-in-command. He got told to focus on his job and let officers worry about tactics. He showed them to Chaplain Weber, who at least listened. "Gene," Weber said, "you're probably right, but you're a corporal. The military doesn't change doctrine because a corporal noticed a pattern. You need a colonel to notice, preferably a general." "How do I get a general to notice?" "You don't. You cook food and follow orders and hope somebody with stars on their collar eventually figures it out." Decker asked how long that might take. Weber looked at him for a long time. "Gene, the Army still uses cavalry tactics from the Indian Wars in some training manuals. The military doesn't change fast. How many men die while we wait for it to change?" Weber didn't have an answer. The cold ration system had another problem. Beyond the physical effects, beyond the morale impact, it was becoming a weapon for the enemy. Japanese radio broadcasts, the propaganda aimed at American troops, had started mocking it. Tokyo Rose, the American woman who worked for Japanese radio, mentioned it in her broadcasts. "While your generals eat steak in Hawaii, you boys eat cold beans in the jungle. They don't care about you. They've already given up on you." The Germans were worse. Their propaganda leaflets dropped on American positions showed pictures of German soldiers eating hot meals, with captions in English. "Even our frontline troops eat better than you. Your officers don't think you're worth the effort." It was psychological warfare, and it was working. On November 12th, Sergeant Mike Patterson led his S-Quad on a dawn raid against a Japanese supply depot. Patterson was 26 from Dallas, one of the best squad leaders in the battalion. 3 combat campaigns, 2 Bronze Stars, recommended for Silver Star. Cold rations at 0500. Attack at 0630. The raid was supposed to be quick. In and out. Hit the depot, destroy supplies, extract before Japanese reinforcements arrived. Patterson's squad had done a dozen operations just like it, except this time, they were slow getting into position. Slow setting charges, slow extracting. Japanese reinforcements arrived 6 minutes early. Patterson took shrapnel from a grenade. Severed his femoral artery. He bled out in 4 minutes while his squad fought to reach him. His second-in-command, Corporal Hayes, made it back with the rest of the squad. Hayes came straight to Decker's kitchen that afternoon. Didn't even go to medical first. Still had Patterson's blood on his hands. "We were off," Hayes said. "The whole squad. Moving like we were underwater. Thinking slow, reacting slow. Patterson kept pushing us, kept saying to move faster, but it was like our bodies wouldn't respond." "When did you eat?" Decker asked. 0500, cold hash. Why does it matter? Did you finish it?" Hayes stared at him. "Half of us couldn't get it down. Too early, too cold, made us nauseous. Jenkins threw his up before we even left the perimeter. What the hell does this have to do with Patterson bleeding out?" Everything, Decker thought, but he didn't say it. That night, military intelligence intercepted Japanese radio communications. They were routine translations, passed around to battalion staff. One line caught Decker's attention. A Japanese company commander reporting to his battalion. "American dawn patrols continue to show reduced effectiveness. Afternoon and evening operations remain aggressive, but morning encounters show delayed responses and poor coordination. Recommend concentrating defensive efforts on morning hours." The Japanese had noticed the pattern too. They were using it, shifting their tactics. concentrating forces for morning engagements because they knew American troops would be slower, weaker, less effective. And the reason was so simple it was almost stupid. Cold breakfast. Decker pulled statistics from the aid station. November 1st through November 12th, Bougainville operations. Morning casualties, 47. Evening casualties, 18. Morning missions, 23. Evening missions, 31. Twice as many missions in the evening. 1/3 the casualties. He showed the numbers to Captain Miller again. Miller looked tired. "Corporal, I believe you. I think you're right. But I can't authorize moving a field kitchen to the forward area. That's a battalion decision, maybe regimental. I don't have the authority." "Can you request it?" "I can. I have. 3 times. It's been denied every time. Division says kitchens stay in the rear. Safety protocols, supply chain logistics, vulnerability to enemy fire. The answer is no." "Sir, men are dying." "I know," Miller snapped. Then quieter. "I know, but I can't change it. The system doesn't work that way." Decker went back to his kitchen. He had 3 assistants now. Private Jackson, 20, from Tennessee. PFC Torres, 23, from New Mexico. Private Williams, 21, from Georgia. Good men, hard workers. He sat them down that night. "I need to know something," he said. "How much do you trust me?" They looked at each other. Jackson spoke first. "Corporal, you pulled me out of latrine duty and taught me to cook. I'd follow you into hell." Torres nodded. "Same." Williams just said, "What do you need?" Decker told them about the pattern, about the casualties, about the Japanese tactics, about the regulations that were killing Marines while Washington slept. Then he told them his plan. Jackson went pale. Torres crossed himself. Williams started to smile. "They'll court-martial us," Jackson said. "Probably," Decker agreed. "Could get us shot," Torres added. "Maybe." Williams leaned forward. "When do we start?" Captain Miller found Decker on the evening of November 17th. The captain's face was gray. He'd lost 12 men in the past 2 weeks. Dawn operations kept failing. The battalion commander was demanding answers Miller didn't have. "Gene," Miller said, using his first name for the first time. "Tomorrow morning, 0700. We're hitting a Japanese machine gun nest that's been murdering our patrols for a week. 48 Marines, led by Lieutenant Hayes." Decker knew Hayes. Good officer, smart, careful, kept his men alive. Hayes had been Patterson's friend. "Cold rations?" Decker asked. Miller's jaw tightened. "That's the regulation." "How many you expect to lose?" 8 to 10 killed, another dozen wounded, if we're lucky." They stood there in silence. Insects buzzed in the jungle heat. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. "Gene," Miller said quietly, "is there any way to get them hot food? Anything? I'm not ordering you to break regulations. I'm asking if there's any possible way." Decker had been thinking about this for 6 days. He'd scouted the terrain. He'd mapped the routes. He'd calculated fuel loads and cooking times and exposure windows. "There's a ridge," he said, 400 yards behind the forward positions. Good cover from direct fire. Defilade from artillery. Access to a stream for water. I could have breakfast ready by 30. Miller stared at him. 400 yards is within mortar range." "Yes, sir." "You'd be cooking under fire." "Yes, sir." "If division finds out, you'd be court-martialed. I'd probably be relieved of command." "Yes, sir." Miller looked at the jungle, looked back at Decker. "I can't authorize this." "I know. If you did it, you'd be acting without orders, on your own initiative, understanding the consequences." "Yes, sir." "And if it went wrong, if someone got killed, you'd be responsible, criminally responsible." Decker thought about Morrison, about Riley, about Patterson bleeding out while his squad moved too slow to save him. "I understand," he said. Miller met his eyes. What time would you need to move out? Oh, 2:30. Full darkness. 3 hours to get equipment in place and start cooking. I'll make sure the sentries know to let you through the perimeter. But Gene, officially, this conversation never happened. What conversation, sir? Miller almost smiled. Then his face went hard again. Hayes is a good man. Those 48 Marines are good men. Bring them back. I'll get them breakfast, sir. They'll bring themselves back. At 0215 hours, Decker woke Jackson, Torres, and Williams. No lights, just whispers in darkness. They'd pre-staged the equipment the night before. 2 portable stoves, fuel canisters, cooking gear. 200 pounds of supplies loaded on a cart with wrapped wheels to muffle noise. Coffee, eggs, bacon, bread, butter, salt, pepper. Everything a man needed before walking into hell. They moved through the perimeter at 0230. The sentries saw them, said nothing, looked away. Captain Miller keeping his word. They followed a narrow trail through dense jungle, moving by feel more than sight. Cloud cover hid the moon. Decker led, one hand on the cart, the other holding a compass he couldn't read in the darkness. 2 miles, uphill. In jungle, thick enough to choke on. It took 90 minutes. The ridge was exactly where Decker remembered. A coral limestone outcrop 20 feet high, providing cover from the Japanese positions 400 yards north. A stream trickled down the eastern side. Trees overhead for concealment from air observation. Perfect. Except they were setting up a kitchen within mortar range of an enemy that had been dropping mortars every morning for 6 weeks. They worked in silence. Torres assembled the stoves. Jackson set up the water point. Williams unpacked supplies. Decker laid out the cooking stations, positioning everything for maximum efficiency. His hands were shaking. He'd cooked 10,000 meals in the Pacific. He'd cooked under air raids, during artillery barrages, through tropical storms. He'd never been scared before. Cooking was what he did. It was what he was good at. But this was different. If the Japanese spotted the smoke, they'd drop mortars. If the mortars hit the fuel cans, the explosion would be visible for miles. Division would investigate. Decker would be court-martialed. Jackson, Jodes, Torres, and Williams would face charges. If the food wasn't ready by 0630, Hayes's Marines would go out cold. The whole risk would be for nothing. If someone got killed because Decker had moved a kitchen into artillery range, he'd carry that for the rest of his life. His hands kept shaking. 4:25 hours. Decker lit the first stove. The flame seemed as bright as the sun. He'd used the lowest setting, kept it shielded behind the ridge, but it felt like a searchlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing happened. No mortars, no machine gun fire. Just the quiet hiss of propane and the night sounds of the jungle. 4:45 hours. Water boiling. Coffee brewing. The smell cutting through the rot and decay. 5:10 hours. Bacon in the pans. 64 strips, 8 pans, sizzling. The sound impossibly loud in the pre-dawn silence. 5:30 hours. Scrambled eggs, 5 dozen, mixed with powdered milk and a pinch of salt. 7 hours. Toast. Bread sliced thick, buttered, toasted on the grill tops. 5 hours. Everything ready. Coffee in canteens, eggs staying warm on low heat, bacon stacked and covered, toast wrapped in cloth. The sun was starting to rise, light seeping through the jungle canopy. Decker could see the ridge ahead, could see the trail where the Marines would come through. Could hear in the distance the first Japanese mortar of the morning launching. It landed 300 yards short. Routine harassment fire. The Japanese did it every morning, dropping a dozen rounds randomly into the American sector. Decker checked his watch. 06:12 hours. Where were the Marines? 6:15 hours. Movement on the trail. A point man, rifle ready, scanning the jungle. Then 2 more. Then a whole squad. Then a platoon, 48 Marines, moving into assault positions, expecting cold beans and a hard morning. Hayes was in the lead. He stopped dead when he smelled the bacon. His head turned. He stared at the ridge, stared at Decker standing there with a cooking pan in his hand, stared at Jackson pouring coffee into canteens. Hayes's mouth opened. No words came out. "Breakfast, sir," Decker said quietly. "Hot and ready." The Marines came through in groups of 8. Hayes had them maintain noise discipline, keep spacing, move through the chow line like it was the most normal thing in the world. But Decker watched their faces. Disbelief first, then wonder, then something that looked like gratitude. Scrambled eggs on tin plates, 4 strips of bacon, 2 pieces of toast with butter, hot coffee in their canteens. They ate standing, weapons ready, but they ate everything. Every man cleaned his plate. Private Kowalski, 19, from Chicago. "Corporal, am I hallucinating? Is this real?" Decker served him another ladle of eggs. "Eat fast, you've got work to do." Sergeant Chen, 28, from San Francisco. "How the hell did you get this here?" "You don't want to know, Sergeant." Hayes came through last. He took his plate, looked at Decker for a long moment. "If we don't come back, you'll come back," Decker said. "Eat." Hayes ate. Then he gathered his platoon at the base of the ridge. 48 Marines, hot breakfast in their stomachs, weapons loaded. Decker watched their posture. It was different, straighter, alert, ready. 0652 hours. Artillery prep started. American guns hammering the Japanese positions. 5 minutes of hell raining on machine gun nests and bunkers. 657 hours. Artillery lifted. 0658 hours. Hayes raised his hand. 700 hours exactly. The platoon moved out. Decker couldn't follow. His job was done. But he stood on the ridge, watching them disappear into the jungle. And he prayed harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. The Japanese position was a reinforced machine gun nest covering the coastal trail. It had killed 14 Marines in the past week. Every patrol that tried to flank it got cut down. Every frontal assault got shredded. Division had decided it needed to be taken. Hayes had pulled the assignment. The plan was simple. 2 squads would pin the Japanese from the front. 3rd squad would flank right through dense jungle. 4th squad would flank left along the beach. Simultaneous assault from 3 sides. In theory, it worked. In practice, timing was everything. The flanking squads had to move through difficult terrain, maintain coordination, hit their positions exactly on schedule. Requires energy, focus, peak physical readiness. The kind of readiness cold beans at 0500 hours didn't provide. 7:14 hours. First contact. Hayes's lead squad opened fire on the Japanese position. Machine gun fire answered immediately. 0721 hours. Right flank moving through jungle. Corporal Martinez leading. They were supposed to be in position by 0725. They made it at 0724.0726 hours. Left flank reached their position along the beach. Sergeant Chen radioed ready. 0727 hours. Hayes gave the signal. 3 squads hit the Japanese position simultaneously. Grenades first, then rifle fire, then the rush. The Marines moved like they hadn't moved in weeks. Fast, aggressive, coordinated. The Japanese returned fire, but the Americans were inside the kill zone before they could adjust. Bangalore torpedoes blew the bunker entrance. Grenades went through. Then Marines with rifles and fixed bayonets. The position fell in 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Previous assaults on similar positions had taken 45 minutes, with heavy casualties. This one was over before the Japanese could organize a defense. Hayes radioed battalion at 0734. Objective secure. 0 friendly KIA. 2 wounded, non-serious. Enemy position destroyed. 17 enemy KIA confirmed. There was a long pause on the radio. Then the battalion commander's voice. Say again your casualties, Lieutenant. 0 killed, 2 wounded, sir. Another pause. Lieutenant, are you certain you attacked the correct position? Yes, sir. The machine gun nest is destroyed. How? Hayes looked back toward the ridge where Decker had served breakfast. We were ready, sir. Part 2. At 0812 hours, a Japanese observation post radioed their battalion commander. The Americans had overrun a key defensive position with unusual speed and aggression. Normally, morning attacks by American forces showed hesitation, poor coordination, delayed reactions. This attack had been different. The Japanese commander requested clarification. The observer reported that American troops had moved with the kind of aggressive energy normally seen only in afternoon operations. He couldn't explain it, neither could the commander. At 0845, Hayes brought his platoon back through Decker's position. The Marines were high on adrenaline, talking fast, reliving the assault. They'd expected a hard fight, expected casualties, expected hell. They'd delivered hell instead of receiving it. Hayes stopped in front of Decker. The lieutenant was breathing hard, still carrying his rifle, his face smeared with dirt and gunpowder residue. That was different, Hayes said. My Marines were different. Moving faster, thinking clearer, fighting harder. I've led this platoon for 7 months. I've never seen them perform like that. Hot breakfast, Decker said quietly. Hayes stared at him. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by understanding. This is what you've been trying to tell everyone. Yes, sir. The pattern you saw, the casualties, the failed morning operations. It wasn't tactics or training or enemy strength. No, sir. It was just breakfast. Yes, sir. Hayes looked at his platoon. Marines checking weapons, drinking water, laughing because they'd survived something they'd expected to die in. Gene, how many men you think would still be alive if we'd been doing this all along? Decker had done the math. 2 months of operations on Bougainville. Morning casualties running 12% versus evening casualties at 4%. The difference was 8 men per 100 per month. A lot, sir. Hayes's jaw tightened. Can you do this again tomorrow? I can do it every day, sir. Then do it. I don't care what regulations say. I don't care if they court-martial both of us. You keep feeding my Marines hot breakfast, and I'll keep bringing them home alive. 6 other Marine officers had been watching from observation posts during the assault. They'd all monitored the radio traffic. They'd all heard 0 KIA. They'd all commanded their own morning operations with very different results. By 0900, 3 captains had hiked to Decker's position. Captain Williams from Fox Company. Corporal, Lieutenant Hayes says you served hot breakfast this morning. Yes, sir. Within mortar range. Yes, sir. Without authorization. Yes, sir. Williams looked at the field kitchen, looked at the Japanese positions 400 yards away. Looked back at Decker. Can you feed 200 Marines tomorrow morning? Decker did quick calculations, current supplies, fuel, cooking capacity. I'll need more eggs and bacon, and 4 more cooks. But yes, sir. You'll have them by 1600 today. Same time tomorrow, same place. Don't get killed. November 19th, 0630 hours, 200 Marines, 8 cooks. Hot breakfast 400 yards from Japanese lines. The assault that morning took 3 objectives in 4 hours. 0 killed, 5 wounded, November 20th. 400 Marines. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, the battalion commander, showed up personally at 0615. He didn't say anything to Decker, just took his plate of eggs and bacon, ate standing up, and watched his Marines feed. Then he got on the radio to regiment. That afternoon, Division called an emergency staff meeting. The subject, unauthorized field kitchen operations in forward combat zones. The S4, the logistics officer, was demanding disciplinary action. The regulations were clear. Then the casualty reports came in. November 1st through November 17th, 47 morning casualties, 23 morning operations, 204% casualty rate. November 18th through November 20th, 7 casualties, 9 morning operations, 78% casualty rate. Mission success rates had jumped from 47% to 89%. The division commander, Major General Roberts, looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he looked at his staff. "Who's responsible for this?" "Corporal Eugene Decker, sir," the S4 said. "He violated AR 30-405 by moving his field kitchen into a forward combat zone without authorization. He's also violated Marine Corps Order 4063 and Division Operations Order 17. "How many violations total?" 11 separate regulatory infractions, sir." Roberts nodded slowly. "And how many Marines are alive right now who wouldn't be if he'd followed those regulations?" Nobody answered. "Best estimate," Roberts said. "Give me a number." The S1 personnel officer checked his casualty projections. "Based on previous casualty rates, sir, we'd expect approximately 32 additional KIA over the 3-day period. We have 7 actual. So approximately 25 Marines are alive who statistically shouldn't be." 25 Marines, Roberts repeated, because a corporal ignored 11 regulations. "Yes, sir." Roberts stood. "Here's what's going to happen. Corporal Decker is going to continue his unauthorized field kitchen operations every morning until I personally order him to stop. Every other mess sergeant in this division is going to do the same thing. We're going to ignore AR 30-405, ignore Marine Corps Order 4063, and ignore Division Operations Order 17. And if anyone from Corps or Fleet asks about it, you will tell them to call me directly. Are we clear?" The S4 started to object. "Sir, the regulations exist for—" "The regulations are killing Marines," Roberts said. "Fix them or ignore them. I don't care which. But we're not losing men because some colonel in Washington decided a field kitchens should stay 5 miles back. Dismissed." By November 25th, every Marine battalion on Bougainville was running forward field kitchens. Hot breakfast every morning, 400 yards from the front lines. Eggs, bacon, coffee, toast. The morning casualty rate dropped to 3.2%. Mission success rate climbed to 91%. The Japanese noticed. Japanese military intelligence on Bougainville operated out of a camouflaged bunker system 8 miles north of the American lines. Captain Takeshi Yamamoto ran the intelligence section for the Japanese 23rd Infantry Regiment. His job was monitoring American tactics, identifying patterns, exploiting weaknesses. For 6 weeks, he'd had one consistent advantage. American dawn operations were weak. American troops attacked sluggishly in the morning, moved slowly, reacted poorly. Yamamoto had adjusted Japanese defensive doctrine accordingly. Morning ambushes, morning counterattacks, morning raids, all timed to exploit American weakness. It had been working perfectly. Then, on November 18th, something changed. An American platoon overran a key defensive position in 6 minutes with 0 casualties. Moved with aggressive energy, perfect timing, devastating effect. Yamamoto marked it as an anomaly. Elite troops, maybe. Fresh unit, November 19th. 3 more successful American morning operations. Fast, aggressive, high success rate. November 20th. 6 operations. All successful. Not an anomaly. A pattern shift. Yamamoto pulled his observation reports. He interviewed survivors from overrun positions. He analyzed American radio intercepts, and he found one consistent detail that made no tactical sense. The Americans were cooking breakfast at the front lines. Multiple observers reported smelling bacon, seeing smoke from field stoves, hearing the sounds of food preparation coming from American forward positions. At first, Yamamoto dismissed it as hallucination or propaganda, but the reports kept coming. On November 23rd, a Japanese patrol infiltrated to within 300 yards of American lines. They confirmed it. The Americans had set up cooking facilities within artillery range. They were serving hot meals to frontline troops. Yamamoto wrote a detailed intelligence report to regimental headquarters. His conclusion: American forces have implemented a logistical innovation that significantly enhances combat effectiveness of morning operations. Their troops are no longer showing the performance degradation we have been exploiting. Recommend immediate tactical adjustments. Previous doctrine of concentrating forces for morning engagements should be abandoned. American morning operations now match or exceed their evening operational effectiveness. The Japanese regimental commander read the report, then read it again. He sent a reply. "Are you certain American forces are cooking meals under fire?" Yamamoto confirmed. "Absolutely certain, sir. Why would they do something so foolish? The cooking facilities are vulnerable to artillery." "Unknown, sir, but the tactical results are undeniable. Their combat effectiveness has increased approximately 40% in morning operations." The regimental commander forwarded the report up the chain. By December 1st, it had reached Japanese Southern Army headquarters in Rabaul. The staff officers there added it to a growing fichage of intelligence reports about American logistics. The Americans had the ability to deliver hot food to frontline troops. They had the industrial capacity to waste resources on such luxuries. They had enough logistical superiority that they could afford to be soft. What the Japanese didn't understand was that it wasn't softness, it was a weapon. News of Decker's forward kitchen operations spread through the Pacific Theater the way all important news spread in the military, through unofficial channels. Mess sergeants talked to other mess sergeants. Officers mentioned it in radio traffic. Pilots flying between bases carried stories. By early December, every mess sergeant in the South Pacific had heard about the corporal on Bougainville who was cooking breakfast 400 yards from Japanese lines. Most thought it was insane. Some thought it was brilliant. A few decided to try it themselves. On Guadalcanal, Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson ran the mess for the 164th Infantry Regiment. He'd been in the Pacific since August 1942. He'd fed troops through the worst of the Solomon Islands campaign. He'd watched cold rations undermine morale, watched hungry men fight poorly, watched the pattern Decker had identified. When he heard about Bougainville, he pulled a map, found a position 2 miles behind the front lines instead of 5. Not as close as Decker's setup, but closer than regulations allowed. December 8th, Thompson moved his kitchen forward. Hot breakfast for 400 soldiers. The morning patrol success rate jumped 28% in one day. The battalion commander noticed. The next morning, he asked Thompson to move even closer. By December 15th, Thompson was operating 1,800 yards behind the front lines. Hot breakfast every morning, evening dinner every night. The 164th Infantry's combat effectiveness climbed higher than it had been since the initial Guadalcanal landings. On New Britain, in the Tarawa Atoll, on New Georgia, mess sergeants started experimenting. Moving kitchens forward, serving hot meals closer to combat, testing the limits. The results were consistent. Hot food meant better performance. Better performance meant fewer casualties. Fewer casualties meant more living soldiers. The math was simple. The implications were revolutionary. By January 1944, there were 43 forward field kitchens operating across the Pacific Theater. All unauthorized, all technically violating regulations, all producing the same dramatic results. Division commanders noticed. Regimental commanders noticed. The casualty reports were impossible to ignore. But officially, nobody acknowledged what was happening. The regulations hadn't changed. AR-30 405 still mandated 5-mile separation. Marine Corps Order 4063 still prohibited forward cooking operations. Everyone just quietly ignored them. On January 12, 1944, the Quartermaster Corps sent an inspection team to the Pacific Theater. Their mission: investigate reports of unauthorized field kitchen operations and restore regulatory compliance. The team was led by Colonel Harrison Blackwell, a logistics officer who'd spent his career managing supply chains. He'd written half the regulations the forward kitchens were violating. He'd come to the Pacific to enforce them. His first stop was Bougainville. He arrived at division headquarters, demanded to see the mess operations, and got escorted to Decker's position. 400 yards from the front lines, 6 field stoves, 12 cooks, hot breakfast for 800 Marines. Blackwell watched for 30 minutes without saying a word. Marines came through the chow line: eggs, bacon, coffee, toast. They ate, standing up, weapons ready, then moved out to their positions. Alert, ready, professional. Blackwell turned to the division commander. "General Roberts, this operation violates 11 separate regulations. You're aware of that?" "Yes, sir." "You authorized it?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" Roberts handed him a folder. Casualty statistics. November through January. Morning operations before forward kitchens. 12% casualty rate, 47% success rate. Morning operations after forward kitchens, 3.8%. Casualty rate, 89% success rate. Blackwell studied the numbers. "This is remarkable." "It's breakfast," Roberts said. "It's against regulations." "Yes, sir, it is." Blackwell looked at the field kitchen again. At Decker serving eggs to a private who couldn't have been older than 18. At the steam rising from the coffee pots. At the smoke drifting up through the jungle canopy. "Colonel," Roberts said quietly, "how many dead Marines does it take to change a regulation?" Blackwell didn't answer immediately. He'd spent 23 years in the Army. He'd built his career on regulations, on proper procedures, on following the book. The book existed for good reasons: safety, efficiency, standardization, but the book hadn't considered this. "I need to see more operations," Blackwell said finally. "Other islands, other units. If this is an anomaly, I need to know. If it's replicable, I need to document it." Roberts nodded. "I'll arrange transport." Blackwell spent 3 weeks touring forward field kitchens across the Pacific. He interviewed mess sergeants. He watched operations. He analyzed casualty data. He ate breakfast at 18 different forward positions, some within 500 yards of Japanese lines. The evidence was overwhelming. On February 7, 1944, Blackwell submitted his report to the Quartermaster General. 63 pages. Charts, graphs, statistics, interviews. His conclusion was 3 sentences. Forward field kitchen operations demonstrably improve combat effectiveness while reducing casualties. Current regulations are based on World War I doctrine and do not account for modern tactical conditions or the psychological value of hot meals. Recommend immediate revision of AR 32-405 and Marine Corps Order 4063 to authorize forward kitchen operations within artillery range when tactical situation permits. The Quartermaster General forwarded the report to the War Department. The War Department sat in it for 6 weeks. Then, on March 24, 1944, they quietly issued a revision to AR 3405. The new regulation authorized field kitchens to operate as close to front lines as unit commanders deemed tactically sound. The 5-mile minimum was removed. Forward cooking operations were officially sanctioned. No press release, no announcement, no acknowledgement that the previous regulation had been wrong, just a quiet change in the book. Eugene Decker's name appeared nowhere in the revision. Neither did any other mess sergeant who'd pioneered forward kitchens. The regulation simply changed, as if the War Department had thought of it themselves. By April 1944, forward field kitchens were standard operating procedure across every theater of war. Europe adopted them in May, just before D-Day. Normandy invasion troops ate hot breakfast before loading onto landing craft. Italy operations integrated forward kitchens throughout the campaign. The Japanese and Germans noticed the pattern. Their intelligence reports documented American troops eating hot meals at the front lines. They interpreted it as American logistical superiority, as industrial capacity, as proof that America could afford luxuries even in combat. They never understood it was a weapon. In June 1944, an Army Engineer Battalion conducted a formal evaluation of forward field kitchen operations. They analyzed fuel efficiency, supply logistics, casualty risk, and combat effectiveness. Their report confirmed what every frontline soldier already knew. Hot breakfast made a measurable difference. The engineers calculated that forward kitchens increased average morning combat effectiveness by 37%. They reduced morning casualty rates by an average of 64%. The operational benefits vastly outweighed the logistical costs and security risks. The report included a technical analysis of optimal forward kitchen placement, fuel requirements, and defensive positioning. It became the basis for field kitchen doctrine that would be used through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Buried in the appendix was a single line: Initial Field Implementation by Non-Co. Missioned Officers in South Pacific Theater, November 1943. No names, no credit, just acknowledgement that soldiers had figured it out first. On June 17, 1944, Corporal Eugene Decker received a Bronze Star for meritorious service in support of combat operations. The citation mentioned innovative logistics solutions and exceptional dedication to troop welfare. It didn't mention that he'd violated 11 regulations and risked court-martial. Decker accepted the medal, saluted, and went back to his kitchen. By August 1944, forward field kitchens were operating in every active combat theater: the 1st Marine Division on Peleliu, the 7th Infantry Division in the Aleutians, the 82nd Airborne in France, the 10th Mountain Division in Italy. Hot breakfast before combat, hot dinner after, simple food, eggs, bacon, coffee, toast, sometimes steak, sometimes fried chicken, always hot. The psychological impact was enormous. Soldiers knew their logistics train could deliver hot food to the front lines. It meant they weren't forgotten, weren't expendable, weren't being sent into combat by officers who didn't care. It meant someone thought they were worth the effort. German prisoners of war reported that American forward kitchens had a devastating effect on German morale. German soldiers ate cold rations almost exclusively in field operations. Seeing Americans eat hot meals while under fire reinforced the perception that America had unlimited resources and unbreakable will. One German sergeant, captured in France in August 1944, told his interrogators, "We knew we'd lost when we saw your soldiers eating steak within artillery range. Who does that? Who has that kind of strength?" The statistical impact of forward field kitchens was difficult to calculate precisely. Too many variables, too much chaos, too much happening simultaneously in multiple theaters. But the Army tried anyway. In January 1945, the Surgeon General's office conducted a comprehensive analysis of combat effectiveness factors. They compared casualty rates, mission success rates, and morale indicators before and after the introduction of forward field kitchens. Their conclusion: forward field kitchens had contributed to an estimated 12% reduction in overall combat casualties across all theaters. That reduction represented approximately 18,000 fewer American deaths over the 18 months since Bougainville. Other factors contributed: improved tactics, better weapons, air superiority, enemy exhaustion. But the food mattered. The data showed it clearly. Hot breakfast saved lives. The Pacific numbers were even more dramatic. Morning casualty rates in the Pacific Theater had dropped from 12% to 3.2% between November 1943 and January 1945. Mission success rates had climbed from 47% to 91%. Some of that was experience. Some was improved intelligence. Some was Japanese resource depletion. But the shift had started on November 18, 1943. with Eugene Decker serving scrambled eggs 400 yards from enemy lines. In April 1945, the war in Europe ended. In August, Japan surrendered. The shooting stopped. The killing ended. Soldiers started coming home. Decker stayed in the Pacific until October 1945, 27 months total. He'd served hot meals at 14 different forward positions across 5 islands. He'd fed approximately 40,000 Marines and soldiers. He'd never been wounded, never been captured, never missed a meal service. He sailed home on a troop transport in November 1945, arrived in San Francisco on November 23rd, processed out at Fort Mason, received his discharge papers on November 27th. He took a train to Omaha. His father met him at the station. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. They drove to Farnham Street, to the family restaurant, and Decker walked into the kitchen like he'd never left. He started cooking the next morning. Breakfast shift. Eggs, bacon, coffee, toast. The same meal he'd served on Bougainville. The same meal that had saved lives. In 1947, Decker opened his own restaurant. The Forward Post. Small place, 40 seats, corner location in Omaha. Open for breakfast and lunch only. Simple menu: eggs, bacon, coffee, toast, sometimes pancakes, sometimes steak and eggs. Always hot. Veterans found it. They always did. Marines who'd eaten at his field kitchen on Bougainville. Soldiers who'd heard the story. Men who understood what it meant. They'd come in, order breakfast, and sometimes they'd tell him stories. About the morn, they'd eaten his eggs before an assault. About the friend who'd survived because they'd been alert and ready. About the difference it had made. Decker would listen, serve more coffee, and never talk about the court-martial risk. Never mention the regulations he'd violated. Never claimed credit. "I just cooked breakfast," he'd say. "You boys did the hard part." Lieutenant Hayes came through in 1948. He'd stayed in the Marines, made captain, would eventually make colonel. He ordered scrambled eggs and bacon. "Gene," Hayes said, "I think about that morning every time I send Marines into combat. That first hot breakfast right before we hit that machine gun nest. We were ready, really ready, and 0 men died." "You led them well, sir. We've been training on your model. Forward logistics, hot meals, psychological preparation. It's doctrine now. Every officer learns it. They don't know it came from a corporal on Bougainville, but it did." Hayes came back every year after that. Annual pilgrimage, scrambled eggs and bacon. Stories about Marines he'd commanded, battles he'd fought. Men who'd survived because they'd been fed properly. In 1952, during the Korean War, forward field kitchens were standard practice. In the Central Highlands, at the Chosin Reservoir, on the MLR, hot breakfast before combat. The Chinese noticed. Their intelligence reports documented it. American troops eating hot meals in forward positions. They interpreted it as American logistical superiority. They were right. But it wasn't just supplies. It was understanding. It was knowing that a man with hot food in his stomach fought better, thought clearer, survived longer. It was Eugene Decker's innovation, implemented across an entire military. In 1963, Decker received a letter from the Marine Corps Historical Division. They were researching logistics innovations of World War II. They'd found references to forward field kitchen operations on Bougainville in November 1943. Was he the Eugene Decker who'd pioneered forward kitchen placement? He wrote back, confirmed the facts, provided details, named Jackson, Torres, and Williams as the men who'd helped. The historian asked if he'd be willing to be interviewed. Decker declined. "It's not important," he wrote. "What's important is that it saved lives. That's all that matters." Jackson had died on Iwo Jima in February 1945, machine gun fire while setting up a forward kitchen under fire. He'd been 22. Torres survived the war, became a chef, opened a restaurant in Santa Fe, died in 1978 at age 57. Williams stayed in the Army, made sergeant major, ran mess operations at Fort Bragg for 15 years, retired in 1966, still alive in 1985. The four of them had started something on a ridge on Bougainville. A simple idea: feed men hot breakfast before combat. It had spread across an entire military. It had changed doctrine. It had saved thousands of lives. And almost nobody knew their names. In 1987, a military historian finally tracked down Decker for a comprehensive interview. Decker was 68 years old, still running the forward post, still serving eggs and bacon. The historian asked him to estimate how many lives the forward field kitchen innovation had saved. Decker thought for a long time. The Army said 18,000, but I think it was more, because it wasn't just the men who didn't get killed, it was the ripple effect. Men who survived came home, had families, built lives. How do you count that? How do you measure 3 generations that exist because a soldier ate hot breakfast before a battle? The historian's report was published in 1990 in the Journal of Military History. It documented the forward field kitchen innovation, its origins on Bougainville, and its impact on combat effectiveness. It finally gave credit to Eugene Decker, Private Jackson, PFC Torres, and Private Williams. By then, Jackson had been dead for 45 years. Torres choice for 12. Williams for 3. Decker read the article, nodded once, and went back to work. Eugene Decker ran the forward post until 1995. 50 years of cooking breakfast. He retired at 76, sold the restaurant to a former Marine who'd eaten at his field kitchen in 1944, and moved to a small house outside Omaha. He died in 2001 at age 82. His obituary in the Omaha World Herald mentioned his World War II service and his Bronze Star, and it mentioned the forward post and his 50 years feeding the community. It mentioned his wife, his 3 children, his 7 grandchildren. It didn't mention that he'd changed military doctrine. It didn't mention the estimated 18,000-plus lives saved. It didn't mention that every forward field kitchen in every American war since 1943 had existed because a corporal from Nebraska decided regulations were less important than living Marines. When people asked him about the war, he'd say he was a cook, just a cook. Served breakfast to soldiers, nothing special. But the Marines who'd eaten his eggs on Bougainville knew different. The men who'd attacked that machine gun nest at 0700 hours on November 18, 1943, knew different. The 48 Marines in Hayes' platoon, who all came home that day, knew different. They knew that breakfast had mattered, that hot food had given them an edge, that a corporal who'd risked court-martial to feed them had saved their lives as surely as any medic or machine gunner. The photo hung in the forward post for 50 years. Decker standing next to his field kitchen on Bougainville, December 1943. Behind him, Marines lined up for breakfast, steam rising from the cooking pots, jungle thick all around, the war visible in their faces. The photo caption said, "Forward Post, Bougainville, 1943." Simple words, but they captured everything. The forward position, the unauthorized risk, the hot meal, the lives saved. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees or headquarters briefings or official channels. Through corporals and privates who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for permission to do what needs to be done. Through men who know that regulations exist to serve soldiers, not the other way around. Through cooks who understand that breakfast isn't just food. It's fuel. It's morale. It's the difference between a man walking into combat ready to win and a man walking in just trying to survive. Eugene Decker understood that. So did Jackson, Torres, and Williams. So did the mess sergeants across the Pacific who copied their model. So did the officers who looked the other way while corporals violated regulations. They understood that sometimes the most important weapon in war isn't a rifle or a tank or a bomber. Sometimes it's scrambled eggs and bacon, served, hot, 400 yards from the enemy, by men who cared enough to break the rules. Each life saved mattered. Each Marine who came home mattered. Each soldier who ate hot breakfast and fought better and survived longer mattered. Each one deserves to be remembered. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. These stories matter. These men matter. Their innovations changed how we fight wars and how we take care of soldiers. Subscribe to stay connected. There are thousands of stories like this from World War II. Stories of ordinary soldiers doing extraordinary things, stories that need to be told. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Tell us if you served, if your family served, if you know veterans who understood what hot breakfast meant in combat. Thank you for keeping these stories alive. Thank you for remembering the men who didn't just fight wars, but who changed them through small acts of courage and innovation. Eugene Decker, Private Jackson, PFC Torres, Private Williams. Cooks who saved thousands of lives, men who deserve to be remembered.